When intimacy feels almost too good to be true, most people assume they've finally found their perfect match. But what if that intense chemistry, that instant emotional fusion, is actually a warning sign rather than proof of compatibility? Documentary will explore why relationships that feel unbelievably magical right from the start can sometimes mask deeper psychological patterns that pull us in with intensity, not genuine connection. I want you to stay curious, stay open, and maybe reflect on a relationship from your past that burned bright and crashed just as fast. One key thing we'll uncover is how rapid emotional bonding can create a false sense of security. When someone mirrors your desires, values, there we go, and boundaries too perfectly, it can trigger a powerful psychological illusion, the belief that you've found your person, even when you barely know them. Another important idea we'll explore is how intense intimacy early on can be driven more by trauma chemistry than compatibility. Sometimes what feels like soul, deep connection is our nervous system reacting to familiarity, not safety. There's a particular kind of intimacy that almost doesn't feel real when you're in it. You know the kind I'm talking about, the kind that sweeps you off your feet so quickly that you barely have time to breathe. It's electric, magnetic, intoxicating. You meet someone and within days or even hours, you feel emotionally exposed in the best possible way. You're sharing secrets you've never told anyone. Your bodies seem to communicate without words, and everything feels aligned, as if the universe finally handed you the person you were always meant to find. Most people call this fate, chemistry, or soul level connection. But there's another perspective that we rarely talk about because it's uncomfortable to consider. What if intimacy that feels amazing too soon isn't a sign of compatibility, but a sign of something else entirely? What makes this so fascinating from a psychological and biological standpoint is that our brains are wired to reward fast, intense bonding, even when it isn't good for us. Early intimacy triggers a cascade of neurochemicals. Dopamine floods the reward centers, oxytocin deepens feelings of trust, and adrenaline heightens emotional memory. This cocktail creates what many describe as a sense of inevitability or rightness. You may catch yourself thinking, I've never felt this way about anyone before, and that must mean something. But the brain often confuses intensity with importance. It's not necessarily the person that's special. It's the neurological high they trigger. There we go. A lot of people assume that if you're opening up emotionally and sexually with ease, it's because you found someone uniquely safe. But research into attachment psychology shows that quick intimacy can also be a response to familiar emotional patterns, especially from childhood. The nervous system tends to bond faster with what feels familiar, not what feels healthy. If you grew up around emotional inconsistency, parental unpredictability, love that had to be earned, or a household where affection and criticism live side by side, your brain might be drawn to intensity because it mimics the emotional landscape you learn to navigate early on. That kind of connection doesn't always feel peaceful. It feels addictive, exciting, dramatic, and often a little unstable, but because it feels familiar, it can be misinterpreted as deeply meaningful. Imagine you meet someone who seems to get you instantly. They mirror your beliefs, share your exact dreams for the future, and respond with all the right words at all the right times. It feels like emotional telepathy. But sometimes what feels like alignment is actually mirroring a subconscious or intentional strategy to accelerate closeness. Humans are naturally skilled at matching others when we want to be liked. Psychologists call this impression management. It becomes especially strong in the early stages of attraction when the goal is to secure connection. The danger is that when two people mirror each other too much too soon, they're bonding with an illusion, not a reality. What they love is the idea of each other, not the truth of who the other person is. Isn't to say that fast-forming intimacy is always unhealthy. There are relationships that begin with a rapid spark and evolve into healthy, secure partnerships. But statistically, when emotional and sexual intimacy escalate unusually quickly, there we go, the odds of burnout, disillusionment, or emotional volatility increase significantly. It's like burning a candle with a large flame. It burns brighter, but it burns out faster. There's a psychological term that helps explain this limerence. Limerence is a state of obsessive infatuation that makes the other person feel perfect, even when you barely know them. It amplifies idealization and suppresses critical thinking. In this state, you're not seeing the person, you're seeing the fantasy your brain wants them to be. One of the most compelling body-based insights into this pattern comes from how the nervous system responds to sudden intimacy. When emotional closeness forms too fast, it can get tricked into confusing vulnerability with security. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, gets released during intimate conversations, physical touch, and sex. It's designed to promote pair bonding and trust. Historically helped humans survive by forming protective social units. But in the modern world, this ancient biological function sometimes works against us. Oxytocin doesn't check for red flags. It only responds to closeness. That means your body can bond with someone who isn't good for you simply because you shared emotionally charged experiences early on. Sex adds another layer to this. Sexual intimacy creates a uniquely powerful bond because it blends physical pleasure with neurological imprinting. During sex, dopamine and oxytocin fuse to form a memory trace in the brain that links the person with intense pleasure and connection. Sex happens very early and feels unusually synchronized or mind-blowing. It can accelerate this imprinting process. Some researchers refer to this as the neurochemical glue of early sexual bonding. The brain starts to associate that person with emotional safety and euphoria, even if the relationship has no foundation yet. This is one reason why people overlook incompatibilities after a powerful sexual beginning. They're not irrational. Biologically influenced, you might recall a relationship in your life that felt like this. The kind where the first few weeks felt like a movie montage. You talked for hours. You got physically close quickly. You dropped your guard faster than you ever expected. It felt cosmic. And if that relationship later turned out to be unstable, confusing, or painful, you might have struggled to understand how something that felt so right ended so wrong. Where psychology offers of a surprising explanation, intense early intimacy often masks differences in compatibilities and even unhealthy relational dynamics. People in the early high tend to skip important steps like observing conflict styles, communication patterns, values, boundaries, or emotional availability. By the time they start noticing misalignments, the bond is already strong, making it harder to detach. There's another layer worth exploring: how trauma can shape the way we experience intimacy. Individuals who have unresolved emotional wounds may be drawn to intense connection because it temporarily soothes internal discomfort. The high of being seen, desired, or deeply understood acts like a bomb, but trauma-fueled bonding prioritizes intensity over stability. If someone's nervous system is used to chaos or unpredictability, calmness can feel boring. Emotional neutrality may even feel unsafe. So when someone walks into their life offering a whirlwind of passion and closeness, it feels like home, even when home was not a safe place. This is why some people confuse anxiety with attraction. The body remembers what love felt like growing up. Even if what it remembers isn't healthy, consider how quickly people begin to share deeply personal information during an intense early connection. You go from small talk to childhood scars in a single conversation. It feels intimate because vulnerability creates closeness, but psychologists call this fox intimacy when it happens too soon. True intimacy is not just about disclosure. It's about what happens after disclosure. It's about consistency, emotional attunement, empathy, and the slow building of trust. When everything happens fast, there isn't enough time to assess whether the person is emotionally safe or capable of handling your vulnerability with care. The intimacy feels real. Security hasn't been tested. There's also a social narrative that fuels this intensity. Movies, romance novels, and cultural mythology glorify love that begins with immediate cosmic recognition. We're taught to chase fireworks, not slow burn warmth, yet relationship science consistently shows that couples who build gradually have stronger, more resilient bonds. Slow doesn't mean dull. It means intentional. It means giving the brain and body time to differentiate between fantasy and reality, between projection and truth. One of the most counterintuitive things to understand is that genuine compatibility often doesn't feel like a high. It feels safe, steady, comfortable, and clear. This can be confusing if you're used to associating love with emotional roller coasters. Healthy intimacy is less about sparks and more about co-regulation. The nervous systems of two people interacting in a way that creates calm rather than chaos. When you're with someone who is truly compatible, your body relaxes, you breathe easier. Your thoughts feel grounded. You don't feel like you're losing yourself. You feel like you're becoming more yourself. Unfortunately, because this doesn't always trigger the same chemical intensity as fast, dramatic connections, many people overlook it. The irony is that the kind of intimacy that's sustainable and deeply fulfilling long-term often feels ordinary at the beginning. It doesn't overwhelm you, it unfolds. It deepens over time, revealing new layers of connection rather than rushing to the final chapter. But this isn't the story we're sold in modern dating culture. We've romanticized speed. We equate intensity with authenticity and calmness with a lack of chemistry. It's no wonder that so many people confuse emotional activation with emotional alignment. What becomes especially important is learning to differentiate between a nervous system that feels activated and one that feels connected. Activation feels like butterflies, anxious excitement, obsession, and urgency. Connection feels like warmth, steadiness, curiosity, and mutual ease. One floods you, the other supports you. When we slow down and allow intimacy to build gradually, we give ourselves the space to see the other person clearly, not as a fantasy, but as a whole human being with strengths, flaws, needs, and complexities. As we examine fast, forming intimacy, it's crucial not to shame or judge ourselves for having been pulled into it. The pull is biological, emotional, and cultural. It makes sense that we crave intensity. It gives us a sense of meaning. The real growth comes from understanding what that intensity represents within us. Is it connection? Is it chemistry? Is it a longing to be chosen? Or is it a familiar pattern replaying itself? The more we understand the psychology and biology of attraction, the better we can navigate it. Intimacy that feels amazing early on is not inherently a red flag, but it is an invitation to stay curious rather than conclusive. To slow down enough to let clarity catch up with chemistry, to ask not how intensely do I feel, but how consistently are we building something real? Because the truth is the most extraordinary relationships don't just start magically, they continue magically because both people choose to show up there again and again long after the initial spark fades, and perhaps that's the most surprising insight of all. The relationships we remember most intensely aren't always the ones that were best for us. There we go. The ones that change our lives in the most meaningful ways often grow quietly, respectfully, and authentically. They're not built on the high of early intimacy, but on the steady unfolding of two people truly seeing each other, learning each other, and choosing each other with intention rather than impulse. So instead of chasing the lightning strike of instant intimacy, maybe the real wonder lies in something deeper connection that expands with time rather than exploding at the start. The kind that doesn't burn you but warms you, the kind your nervous system doesn't have to survive but can finally rest in. Because when intimacy grows at a pace that allows your heart, mind, and body to stay present, it's not just amazing, it's healthy, secure, and genuinely transformative. There's an unspoken conversation happening between bodies long before any words are exchanged. Most people assume communication is something we do with our voices, our language, our carefully chosen sentences. But if you've ever felt a hand on your back that instantly calmed you, or a hug that told you more than 1,000 texts ever could, you already know that the body has its own vocabulary, one that often speaks more honestly than the mind ever will. And intimacy isn't built on words alone. It's shaped in the subtle physical cues, the sensory experiences, hormonal exchanges that happen beneath our awareness. These moments don't just create connection, they imprint it. What fascinates me most is how the body keeps score of every intimate experience we have, good or bad. Our skin, the largest organ we have, is wired with millions of nerve endings designed not only to sense the environment, but to register pleasure, warmth, comfort, and safety. When someone touches us with intention, our brain doesn't just recognize the physical contact, it assigns meaning to it. Even a light touch can trigger a cocktail of oxytocin, dopamine, and endogenous opioids, those natural pain relieving chemicals that soothe both body and mind. We often talk about chemistry between two people, but most of us never consider that chemistry is literal. Intimacy is not just an emotional experience, it's a physiological one. Think about how different forms of touch feel on the body. A rushed or distracted touch can feel hollow, almost irritating, like a handshake that lacks presence, but a slow, attentive touch lands differently. It tells your nervous system, you are safe here. Your breathing slows. Your muscles soften. Your thoughts settle. It's remarkable, really, how the nervous system responds to another person's presence. Our bodies are constantly communicating long before we consciously understand why we're drawn to someone or why we pull away. This is one of the reasons why some people feel deeply bonded after intimate physical experiences, even if the relationship itself isn't emotionally secure. Yeah. The body can form attachments faster than the mind can evaluate them. The link between touch and attachment goes back to infancy. From the moment we're born, our earliest blueprint for love is shaped through physical closeness. The warmth of a caregiver's body, the rhythm of a heartbeat, safety of being held, these sensory experiences teach the nervous system what connection feels like. Research shows that babies deprived of affectionate touch have higher cortisol levels, weaker immune systems, and more difficulty forming healthy relationships later in life. This same mechanism follows us into adulthood. When touch is nurturing, consistent, and safe, it becomes a stabilizing force that strengthens emotional resilience. When touch is absent, inconsistent, or conditional, we crave it intensely, but often without knowing how to receive it in a healthy way. As adults, we don't outgrow this need. We just learn to hide it better. Some people chase physical intimacy to fill emotional gaps, mistaking sexual contact for closeness. Others avoid touch entirely because it feels too vulnerable. The body becomes either a refuge or a battleground. And what most people don't realize is that sexual intimacy isn't only about arousal or pleasure. It's a form of communication. How someone touches, how they respond to touch, how they listen to your body during intimacy. These things reveal their emotional awareness, their comfort with vulnerability, their capacity for empathy. You can often tell more about the health of a relationship from how two people hold each other after sex than from anything that happens during it. One of the most surprising findings in relationship science is that couples who engage in affectionate, non-sexual touch, like holding hands, cuddling, and resting against each other, report higher satisfaction than those who rely solely on sex for intimacy. Many people underestimate the emotional power of small physical gestures. A hand intertwined with yours can lower blood pressure. A gentle forehead kiss can reduce anxiety. Consistent, affectionate touch builds something that sex alone can't attunement. It creates a shared emotional frequency between two nervous systems. When that resonance is present, intimacy deepens naturally. When it's absent, even frequent sex can feel empty. Yet, not all touch creates connection. Some touch triggers anxiety because the body remembers past experiences where vulnerability wasn't safe. Trauma lives in the body, not just the mind. If someone learned that closeness leads to pain, betrayal, or rejection, their nervous system may perceive intimacy as a threat. In those cases, even gentle touch can feel overwhelming. This is where self-awareness becomes essential. Understanding how your body responds to intimacy, whether it relaxes or braces, opens or shuts down, can reveal more about your relationship patterns than any personality test ever could. The most profound intimacy doesn't happen when two bodies come together. It happens when two nervous systems learn to co-regulate. Co-regulation is the process of calming or energizing each other's physiological state through presence, breath, voice, and touch. When you sit beside someone who feels safe to your body, your heart rate synchronizes with theirs, your brainwaves shift. This is not poetic metaphor, it's scientific fact. Researchers studying couples found that partners in healthy relationships literally sync up biologically when they're emotionally connected. This is why lying on someone's chest and hearing their heartbeat can feel grounding. It's why being held by the right person can feel like coming home. But here's where things get more complex. Because touch is such a powerful bonding mechanism, it can also create illusions of compatibility. Two bodies may fit well physically even when emotionally or psychologically mismatched. The body can feel attached to someone who is inconsistent, unavailable, or emotionally unsafe simply because the physical chemistry is strong. Oxytocin doesn't check for red flags. It doesn't evaluate emotional readiness. It only registers closeness. That's why people sometimes stay in relationships that are unhealthy. They're body bonded before their brain had a chance to assess. In those cases, physical intimacy becomes a form of emotional confusion, comfort and conflict intertwined. When you understand this, intimacy becomes less about intensity and more about awareness. How does your body feel before, during, and after a moment of closeness? Do you feel more grounded or more anxious? More seen or more performative? More connected or more alone? The body rarely lies. In fact, many people don't realize that after intimacy, the body reveals the truth the mind tries to ignore. Some wake up feeling warm, calm, and emotionally nourished. Others feel empty, restless, or strangely disconnected. The difference lies not in the physical act, but in the emotional safety that surrounds it. It's also worth considering how modern culture has distorted intimacy. We live in a world where physical exposure is easier than emotional exposure. People share their bodies with others long before they share their fears, dreams, or authentic selves. Sex has become a shortcut to closeness, but the shortcut often bypasses the very foundation that true intimacy requires. Real intimacy is slower, deeper, more layered. It asks for presence, curiosity, and listening, not just with the ears, but with the body. It asks us to notice the way someone's breathing changes when they're nervous, the subtle shifts in posture when they're scared, the softening of their shoulders when they feel held. These details create connection far more lasting than any sexual high. One thing that often surprises people is that the most intimate moments in a relationship aren't always sexual. Sometimes intimacy is found in tracing the lines of someone's hand, in sitting silently together on a quiet morning, and in the vulnerability of sharing a childhood story that still shapes who you are. Touch amplifies these moments, but it doesn't replace them. The body might initiate connection, but the soul sustains it. As we move deeper into understanding intimacy, the key question shifts from how can I find someone who makes me feel intensely to how can I build a relationship where my nervous system feels safe enough to be fully seen. When intimacy is rooted in safety rather than urgency, the body responds differently. Touch becomes nourishment, not distraction. Sex becomes expansion, not escape. Vulnerability becomes a bridge, not a risk. The truth is, intimacy isn't something you fall into. It's something you cultivate. It grows in the space where bodies feel safe, where communication is honest, where touch is intentional, where both people show up not just with desire, but with presence. When this kind of intimacy forms, it doesn't feel like a high. It feels like truth. There we go. It feels like recognition. It feels like two people choosing each other not to fill a void, but to share a life. We often think connection requires grand gestures or perfect compatibility. In reality, it's built in micro moments, the shared glance across a room, the gentle squeeze of a hand, the silent comfort of resting together after a long day. These moments teach the body, you don't have to be on guard here. And when the body relaxes, the heart follows. If there's one takeaway, it's this intimacy begins long before clothes come off, and it lasts long after the physical touch ends. It lives in the way two bodies communicate, the way they respond to each other's presence, the way they create safety through consistency, care, and attention. Words may express love, but gives it a place to live. Real intimacy is not measured by how intense it feels, but by how safe, seen, and connected you become in its presence. The body always knows the difference.